So here's the thing about the Save America Act, this huge voter suppression bill that passed the House and is now gone on to the Senate. I'm not really worried about it at all. Now, the bill is absolutely vile. It would be the biggest poll tax we've had in my lifetime, and its goal is to disenfranchise 10 million women voters. And the Save America Act, which is this new iteration of the SAVE Act from last year, is the subject about which I get the most worrying comments, concerned, freaked out DMs, especially over the last several days as the bill passed the House and has now moved to the Senate. But I am really not that worried about it. And I want to encourage you to kind of de-escalate yourself a little bit about it. And if I can help you do that in this video, then awesome. Now, I understand why people are freaked out. The bill is reprehensible. It's despicable. Republicans are trying to cheat so hard. They are desperate to cheat, and they're not trying to hide it at all. The gerrymandering in Texas, a whole bunch of other shit they're doing to disenfranchise voters all across the country. This is part of it. They don't want women voting, especially. They don't want Black folks, women. They don't want people who are not white conservative men to be able to cast a vote and have it counted. Because if we all have our voices heard, if we all get to participate in our civic duty of voting and then have those votes counted, Republicans are going to get their asses handed to them. They don't want representative democracy, y'all. They want to control the system so that their people stay in power. That's not democracy, that's fascism. That's what tin pot dictators do. That's what tyrants do. They control the election system so that there is this performance, there's this veneer of an actual election, but it's not free and fair, and it's not the voice of the people being represented at all. It turns elections into this complete sideshow, right? A farce. It makes a farce out of elections. That is who Republicans are. That is the tactic they have been employing for decades, and they're doing it on just like a much more massive scale now because they're really, really afraid of being held accountable. They're afraid of us, the American people, being able to participate in democracy.
If we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
So let's be really clear. That is exactly what is going on. We should be talking about it. We should be talking about the fact that Republicans are trying to cheat any way that they possibly can. They're desperate to hold on to power. They don't want you to vote. They don't want your vote counted unless you're a conservative, right-leaning, Christo-fascist white dude. They don't want you to be able to vote. Of course, which is why we hear people on the far right talking about repealing the 19th Amendment. The SAVE Act in particular would disenfranchise women voters. Anytime the Republicans try to suppress the vote, anytime they want partisan gerrymandering instead of nonpartisan redistricting commissions, right? Anytime they want to engage in some kind of voter suppression, that has the potential to come back and backfire on them. If you're looking at how older voters are more likely to vote by mail because they can vote from the comfort of their home. Well, Donald Trump wants to do away with vote by mail. If you look at the fact that the SAVE Act is trying to disenfranchise women voters in particular, the way that they are trying to do that, there's a high likelihood that that would disenfranchise the white Republican women. Remember, white women, what was it, like 54% for Donald Trump?
We're asking questions. They're saying, well, that's going to prevent women who've got complications with name changes. Hold on. We actually allow a fail-safe that you go and you can sign an affidavit that says, this is my driver's license. My name is Sarah Jones on my driver's license. Here's my birth certificate, Sarah Smith. I certify under penalty of perjury that I'm the same person. And we allow that. And we allow states to make other mechanisms under their laws to make sure that they match it. So we're just requiring a process.
That is all that would be required of a married woman? Because that is a major talking point coming from Democrats and across the mainstream media, that you are disenfranchising some 69 million married women.
How about the men in this country? Do they have to do it? How about white men? The Trump administration, he's obsessed with the Gilded Age. He's obsessed with the Monroe Doctrine. He's obsessed with that period of history. What was the president that he was all over? McKinley. They are nostalgic for pre-suffrage days, for pre-civil rights legislation days, they are nostalgic for Jim Crow.
Peter Thiel said all this explicitly.
They're nostalgic for the poll tax system. They want to make it harder for women to vote. And they're pretending like, oh gosh, all you got to do is just go sign an affidavit. All you have to do is sign an affidavit and jump through all of these hoops. And this population, we're going to create a legitimately additional barrier for nearly 70 million Americans in this country, and then tell you it's not that big of a deal, that you have to go through this extra step that your husband doesn't have to go through.
So let me talk about what this new Save America Act actually proposes, because it's worse than the old Save Act from last year. It's worse. Republicans are more desperate than they were a year ago. And then I want to talk about why I'm not particularly worried about it, and I think there's other things that we need to be focusing on. So I'm referencing here the breakdown from the lawyers at the Brennan Center for Justice who have taken apart this legislation. I've read through it, but I appreciate attorneys who have their eyes on it. So the Save America Act would not only require proof of citizenship, but also proof of residence in order to be able to register to vote, right? This alone could disenfranchise tens of millions of American voters because according to the Brennan Center for Justice, 9% of the American population moves within a state in any given year, but people don't typically update their driver's license until that driver's license expires. So if they showed up with their proof of citizenship and their proof of residence and they didn't match, they would no longer be able to register to vote. Now, keep in mind, proof of citizenship is a bunch of bullshit because you already have to sign a sworn affidavit when you register to vote saying, I am an American citizen, I am legally allowed to vote, and I understand that I can be prosecuted under federal law if I've lied on my voter registration. This bill would also require a photo ID in order to vote, but not just any photo ID. Now, I understand that a majority of Americans don't have a problem with the concept of being asked to present a photo ID in order to be able to vote. But the list of acceptable IDs under the Save America Act is far more restrictive than the voter ID laws in every single state except Ohio. Particularly concerning is that this bill would no longer let Indigenous Americans use their tribal ID as a valid form of ID unless it has an expiration date. Most tribal IDs do not contain an expiration date. So you're looking at potentially millions of Indigenous Americans being disenfranchised by the Republicans if this passes. Additionally, the Save America Act would require you to present either your birth certificate or your passport in order to register to vote. Less than half the American population has a passport. The people who do have a passport tend to be more affluent, they tend to be white, they tend to vote Republican. If you're going to have a birth certificate, the information on that birth certificate has to match your residency documents or what other identification you are bringing to register. You understand how this is going to disenfranchise 10 million American women. Married women are going to be disenfranchised by this bill because I don't know about you, but like my last name wasn't Baker on my birth certificate. Requiring that you have to pay for documentation like a passport, which can cost a couple $100 by the time you have gathered all of the information and gone through that process, that amounts to a poll tax. That is essentially a poll tax. If you have to have your passport in order to register to vote, you might be like, Angela, it's just for registering new voters. No, it's not. Anytime you move, anytime under this new bill, you get kicked off the voter rolls, anytime you need to update your party registration. Let's say you're like really fucking sick of the Republicans. You want to change your registration from Republican to Democrat or to independent, unregistered, guess what? That is considered a new registration. And under this legislation, you'd have to provide all of that new documentation or you can't vote.
Hey guys, I wanted to double tap. Is that the right term? I don't know. I want to talk about the SAVE Act again. I already posted a clip from the 5 about this, but I've been thinking about it since we got offset and realizing that people, even Republicans who are very well researched, steeped in the material, whatever, people are paying attention, don't even know that the SAVE Act is not a voter ID bill. It's a voter registration bill. And those things are markedly different. And when they talk about it as voter ID, it makes Democrats seem like assholes, like we're on the wrong side of another 80-20 issue, when in reality, most Democrats are open to the idea of having to present voter ID when you go to the polls. It just has to be reasonable. So accepting driver's licenses, state IDs, tribal IDs, and if they don't have an expiration date, maybe there's some conversation about student IDs even. We have to be open to those kinds of conversations so that you can properly push back on what the SAVE Act wants to do, which makes it that you have to show proof of citizenship when you register to vote. So that's a passport or a birth certificate. And I think a lot of us know how complicated that gets. A, nearly 50% of Americans don't even have a passport. That includes a lot of Republican voters, especially MAGA voters. But then B, with the birth certificate issue, how many of you have the birth certificate just on hand or are going to go through the effort of going to get it? Let's say you're a student, you just showed up at the University of Wisconsin, you want to be able to vote, you're in a swing state. Did you bring your birth certificate when you went off to college? I sincerely doubt it. My mom kept mine locked up pretty tight. And then if you've gone through a name change, It's a complete nightmare for women who are listening to this and have changed their name. You know what I'm talking about. I didn't even change my name, and it took me 3 trips to the DMV to be able to get my real ID, because different forms of ID had different formulations of my name because I have 2 middle names. Thanks a lot, Mom, for that. It didn't make a ton of sense. Though I do kind of love having your last name in my name. Anyway, Democrats have to own this better. We have to talk about the importance of voter ID to make it clear to people that the SAVE Act is not about voter ID. And it's going to result in millions of people, a lot of them who would vote Republican, having a much more difficult time being able to get registered and then go to the polls.
The 2 parts of this bill that I actually find to be the most appallingly obvious attempt from the Republicans to suppress the vote are that it would require that states purge their voter rolls every 30 days. Do you know how expensive and onerous that would be for state elections officials? Likewise, previously there was this 90-day quiet period that protected voters from being mistakenly thrown off the rolls right before Election Day. This would end this. So you would be fine 31 days out from the election and be like, cool, I'm registered to vote. Everything's handy dandy. You go to vote on Election Day and they're like, oh, you got kicked off the rolls in the last 30 days. Additionally, this would prohibit universal mail-in voting. 8 states, including Washington, D.C., have vote by mail. In Oregon, we only have vote by mail. Donald Trump has been attacking vote by mail since 2015. Guess how he votes? He votes by mail. The reason that he attacks vote by mail is because it increases people's access to the ballot box. American citizens are more likely to be able to vote. Removing barriers to access, right? That's important in community organizing. It's important in being able to exercise your rights as an American citizen. And mail-in voting is so good. It allows people who can't get off work, because guess what? We don't have a national holiday on Election Day. People who can't get off work, people who are ill, people who, for whatever reason, feel safer voting in the comfort of their home. And in particular, when you understand how Donald Trump and Steve Bannon have been saying that they want to do the very, very illegal thing of putting federal troops, ICE agents, or members of the military at polling locations, armed soldiers at polling locations, you understand why they want to do away with vote by mail. Because if you can only vote in person and you have to run a gauntlet of armed soldiers that work for the regime and are going to intimidate you out of voting for somebody who is not dear leader, you understand how this works, right? Donald Trump hates vote by mail because it allows democracy to work. All of this is about Republicans making democracy no longer functional in the United States in just so many ways, right? The Save America Act layers in all there's more to it than this even. I don't have time to get into all other aspects, but like the goal is to make it as hard as possible for people to vote. So why am I not worried about this? Well, because this has gone to the Senate and it has to meet the 60 vote filibuster threshold in order to pass into law. And it's not going to. John Thune and other Republicans, they don't want to get rid of the filibuster because they know after the midterms that would be devastating for them. They're not anxious to do that. And so there is no current threat right now. We need to keep our eyes on it, right? Don't lose sight of this happening. But I am not scared about it passing. It does not have the votes to pass. There is no way right now it's going to get the votes to pass. And this is the position of Indivisible as well. I do think it's worth contacting your representative and your senators and let them know you're outraged about this and that this cannot get passed into law. Totally worth doing that, but I think we need to put most of our energy and our worry and our concern at other things that the regime is trying to do, other hinky shit that they're trying to do. And I think the reason that we're all worried about this is because it's been in the news a bunch. And I think it's great that Democrats are drawing attention to the fact that Republicans are real shitbags. What they're doing is deeply undemocratic and deeply un-American. Yep, we should be having that conversation. I agree, but I don't think we need to be freaked out about this. I think we need to put our energy toward other threats that are more pressing and that need our attention.